Should we authorize immigration enforcement an extra 14 days to descend upon domestic cities in exchange for a flimsy guarantee regarding upcoming policy debates? Residents of our country are experiencing distress while recent arrivals suffer harsh conditions, making it necessary to pursue the ousting of Christine Nome, the dismissal of Stephen Miller, and the end of this systemic disarray. It remains a terrible blemish on our domestic standing that public faith has deteriorated during Secretary Nome's tenure, and the presiding officer is presently willing to entertain requests for brief remarks. For what purpose does the delegate from North Carolina seek recognition, Mr. Speaker, as I rise to address the floor for a moment and elaborate on my thoughts if required, and seeing no dissent, the delegate receives 1 minute. Mr. Speaker, I rise right now to highlight Angela Emmer Flores, a citizen in my region and a remarkably bright pupil presently finishing her studies at Ocracoke High School, who is prepared to be the premier graduate from Hyde Academy to complete her diploma while holding a 2-year degree from Beaufort County Community College. This fantastic program helps students hoping to advance their academic goals quickly by granting an initial jump into higher education, and as a practicing physician, I am thrilled to hear about Angela's goal to work hard toward a career in advanced nursing, a field I highly respect. The eastern portion of North Carolina needs more dedicated and hardworking individuals in the healthcare sector, as treating patients is one of the most rewarding and important career paths a person can choose, and I am glad she is pursuing a future in medicine. Speaking as a medical professional with decades in the field, I gain immense joy from treating patients and helping them through intensely difficult times, and I am certain she will find similar fulfillment. I extend my warmest praises for an incredible achievement to Angela, with special thanks to her parents for supporting her academic journey, and I wish you the best as you continue your education. Well done, Angela, and I yield my time back. For what purpose does the representative from Kentucky seek time? And with no objections raised, the representative is given the floor for 60 seconds. Mr. Speaker, this legislative chamber is deciding whether to fund an agency that has recently shown its chosen way of spending taxpayer dollars, noting that when the majority party offered unrestricted money previously, the department used it in manners that led to tragic outcomes for domestic citizens. Currently, the department wants another 14 days of funding without stipulations to continue the flawless execution of their aggressive operations. Within a short span, 2 individuals lost their lives just weeks apart, while during that exact same window, a young child was used in an enforcement tactic and kept away from home alongside 3 others who passed away while in custody during that specific time frame. I absolutely refuse to come back to this podium in a few weeks discussing a growing list of tragic incidents. Mr. Speaker, I urge my colleagues to consider what we are gambling with right now by asking if we should permit another fortnight of raids on domestic communities in exchange for a weak promise of upcoming reform talks, because you must forgive me if I doubt this administration is negotiating honestly, which it certainly is not. The representative yields the remaining time, and for what purpose does the member from Ohio seek recognition? Mr. Speaker, I request unanimous consent to address the Assembly for 1 minute and to revise and extend my remarks, and hearing no opposition, the member is recognized. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, as I rise today to celebrate C.J. Jones and Isaac Corcoran of the Ross County Junior Fair Board, since they wanted to help combat local food insecurity and decided to participate in a regional anti-hunger initiative backed by agricultural groups. This particular program challenges youth agricultural boards to collect the highest possible volume of food donations to assist community organizations in fighting hunger within our neighborhoods. CJ and Isaac set an ambitious goal of collecting a massive amount of provisions across Ross County, and though many questioned if this was possible, they ultimately surpassed all hopes by leading their county to break previous records, gathering over 100,000 pounds of food this past year. This number is vastly larger than the total collected during previous efforts, and actions by young leaders like them ensure that fewer Ohio families will go hungry. Their actions show exactly what can be achieved when the people of Ohio direct their focus toward a common goal and look out for the needs of their community. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I yield back my time, at which point the representative yields. For what purpose does the delegate from Oregon seek recognition? Mr. Speaker, I ask for unanimous consent to address this chamber for 1 minute and to revise my remarks, and with no objections, the representative is recognized. Mr. Speaker, this is a significant cultural month, and I am here to be a persistent voice throughout its duration, noting that recently federal personnel utilized intense crowd control measures against young people. I must repeat that federal agents used aggressive deterrence against youth as working-class families in Portland gathered to exercise their constitutional rights, and among the crowd were teenagers, the elderly, and even pets. Yet authorities saw this group as enough of a threat to deploy non-lethal projectiles and clouds of strong deterrence. I have mentioned this before, and I will say it again, that what we are seeing resembles aggressive state-sponsored tactics rather than standard law enforcement, which needs to stop right now. Mr. Speaker, I insist that this administration leave our city alone, follow the laws, and hold those responsible for these harsh actions accountable, because enough is enough, and I yield my remaining time. The representative yields the floor, and for what purpose does the South Carolina member request recognition? I wish to address the Assembly for 1 minute and expand my remarks, and hearing no objection, the representative is recognized. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As recently the governor of South Carolina gave the annual state address, and I am grateful that under his leadership, our region has seen another fantastic year with massive economic investments bringing thousands of jobs across his long tenure. The governor is correct when he says that the state's financial health is excellent, our business environment is inviting, and the brightest days are still ahead of us. South Carolina prospers alongside our local leadership, the strong legislative majorities, and the federal administration, all working to bring greatness back to our nation. In closing, may our military personnel be protected as the global struggle for safety continues, noting that peace is being promoted through strength by highlighting international falsehoods while foreign adversaries destroy crucial infrastructure, mirroring historical tragedies of forced starvation. These aggressive global acts tragically impact innocent lives and essential facilities, and we send our sympathies to the family of a dedicated staff member's spouse who recently passed away. I yield back my time, and for what purpose does the representative from North Carolina seek recognition? Mr. Speaker, I ask for time, and with no objections, the member receives 60 seconds. Mr. Speaker, the public expects us to handle the concerning behavior of border and immigration personnel who have operated beyond the acceptable bounds of law enforcement. While we must support our security teams and enforce our laws, it is crucial that federal agencies operate within the limits of public trust. We must protect the rights of our citizens to exercise their constitutional freedoms, and we also expect our national security agents to follow reasonable standards of conduct without interference. Public trust has deteriorated under the current secretary's watch, and she must be held accountable after previously refusing to accept responsibility. Therefore, in this House of Representatives, I call for the immediate resignation of the leading figure at Homeland Security, and I yield my time. The member yields. And for what purpose does the Georgia representative ask for the floor? I request unanimous consent to address the chamber for 1 minute and to revise my statements, and with no objections, the member is recognized. Mr. Speaker, I stand today to pay respects to a dedicated educator, business owner, and former state legislator from Douglas County who recently passed away following a long and brave fight against illness. We celebrate his decades of outstanding public service in the state legislature, where he represented multiple districts and served his constituents with deep integrity and vision. We also recognize his constant advocacy for our state's higher education system, working as both a teacher and a lawmaker, a legacy that lives on through a scholarship designed to honor empathy and leadership in students. Most importantly, he was a loving husband and father, survived by his wife and their 3 sons, and I thank you, Mr. Speaker, as I yield the floor. The member yields. And for what purpose does the New Jersey representative seek recognition? Hearing no objection, the representative is recognized for 60 seconds. Mr. Speaker, I rise to celebrate a dedicated law enforcement officer upon his 3 decades of service with the Cranford Police Department, wishing him the absolute best in his well-earned retirement. His extensive time in neighborhood patrol and investigations allowed him to build priceless community relationships and strengthen the bond between the police and local families. That connection was shown profoundly during his son's difficult health battle, when local emergency units and neighbors rallied around his family, reflecting the very kindness he always showed to others. He has been a foundational part of his community, leaving behind a legacy of fairness and civic duty for everyone to follow. And on behalf of our district, I congratulate him on a fantastic career and yield my time. The member yields. And for what purpose does the New York representative seek recognition? Mr. Speaker, I ask for unanimous consent to speak for 1 minute and to expand my remarks, and with no objections, the representative is recognized. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, as it is reported that officials have met with a group looking to break away from Canada and form their own nation. Why any domestic administration would encourage a group trying to destabilize a peaceful allied neighbor is completely beyond understanding. However, those who suggest we should aggressively take over allied territories are operating with a dangerous mindset aimed at forcing our neighbors into submission. Aligning in any way with factions that want to disrupt our northern neighbor reminds me of historical efforts to provoke conflicts on our borders during major global wars. Do we really think that alienating our closest global allies is a smart international strategy while facing major global rivals? No, it is absolute foolishness that lets arrogance cloud reasonable diplomacy, and it must stop before we cause permanent damage, and I yield the floor. The member yields the time, and for what purpose does the representative from Ohio seek recognition? Hearing no objection, the member is recognized for 60 seconds. All right, Mr. Speaker, families in Springfield are currently facing a severe storm fueled by long-standing prejudice and hostility. We have seen prominent political figures spread harmful inaccuracies about documented residents in our state, even admitting a willingness to invent stories to push an agenda. Those fabricated tales dehumanized hardworking people who were legally present and helping to rebuild a community. Now the administration is turning those false claims into official policy by threatening to revoke legal protections overnight, stripping away lawful status in an instant. This serves as a blueprint for a massive, ethically questionable removal operation. For those of us from diverse backgrounds, the unfair targeting of these communities is something we clearly see and deeply feel. This country must do better, and the leadership needs to extend these protections and stop the aggressive rhetoric immediately. The allotted time has expired, and members are reminded to avoid personal attacks against the executive leadership. For what purpose does the gentleman from Vermont seek recognition? To address the chamber for 1 minute and expand my remarks, and hearing no objection, the representative is recognized. Mr. Speaker, tonight, as I stand here, people across the country are facing intimidation funded by our own tax dollars. Citizens do not support this, and I want to be their voice in this room tonight to say they refuse to live in a place where you can be stopped randomly by unidentified personnel demanding paperwork. They have no desire to live in a society where fundamental constitutional rights are ignored, and they certainly do not want to see people harmed just for defending their neighbors. Mr. Speaker, we warned our colleagues that providing massive, unchecked funding to this department would create an aggressive force that mistreats domestic residents. We issued that warning, and it breaks my heart to say that our worst fears have come true. People are experiencing deep trauma while migrants face harsh treatment, meaning we must remove the current leadership and stop this chaotic approach to enforcement, and I yield the floor. The member's time has expired, and for what purpose does the gentleman from Indiana seek recognition? Hearing no objection, the member is given 60 seconds. Speaker, I stand today to recognize a significant cultural month focused on historical remembrance, and I want to honor an incredibly dedicated veteran from my state whose long life of service inspires us all. During the early 1940s, he joined the military and served bravely across 3 major global conflicts. Today, he remains an active member of a local veterans organization where he constantly helps returning service members transition back into civilian life. It is entirely because of the sacrifices of veterans like him that we get to live in a free and democratic society. Mr. Speaker, please join me in celebrating this month of historical remembrance by honoring the selfless courage and loyalty of this remarkable veteran. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I yield my time back to the floor. The member yields. And for what purpose does the representative from New Mexico seek recognition? I ask for unanimous consent to speak for 1 minute and to revise my remarks, and with no objections, the member is recognized. Mr. Speaker, what kind of country uses small children as leverage or political props? Tonight, a young child and his father have finally returned home after being aggressively detained and transported far across the country. This situation should never have happened, as the young boy was taken from his home in clear violation of basic rights due to a deeply flawed and harsh enforcement quota strategy. Thousands of minors have been detained nationwide this year, which is a shameful embarrassment to our country, and that is why we must take action. This is the exact reason I will vote against providing any more funding to this department, and why we must push for immediate accountability at the highest levels. The time to act is right now, as we refuse to be complicit in these actions, and the member's time has concluded. For what purpose does the representative from Ohio seek recognition, or rather the representative from Oregon? The delegate from Oregon requests the floor, and hearing no objection, the member is recognized for 60 seconds. Thank you, as recently the executive leader posted a message combining the destructive actions of a tiny few with the peaceful behavior of thousands who were legally protesting authoritarianism. They were exercising their lawful right to assemble for free speech, yet the leadership announced plans to send federal units into our city. Well, let me be clear that our region has a long, proud history of peacefully voicing dissent, and we will continue to do exactly that. Therefore, I demand that the national leadership and justice departments follow their own rules and stop using the bad behavior of a few as an excuse to assault peaceful crowds. We will not back down in our city, and we do not need or want federal intervention, so thank you, and the member's time has ended. For what purpose does the representative from Ohio seek recognition, and with no objection, the member is given 60 seconds. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, as I rise with an urgent plea for family-run farms, especially those in the heartland that I represent. The vast majority of the districts I serve are highly agricultural, filled with hardworking people who grow the food that powers our nation. They deserve our absolute support because the people who farm and build things are the backbone of this country. Yet their work has never been harder, as they have faced constant hurdles recently, including terrible weather conditions and massive losses in global trade markets due to heavy tariffs. The combination of environmental stress and harsh financial policies is severely hurting our local producers. Our farmers need stability, meaning we must pass comprehensive agricultural legislation instead of careless financial penalties that destroy their livelihoods. We are losing foreign sales while spending billions on imported goods, leaving our own agricultural workers facing massive financial ruin. Something is deeply wrong when our domestic growers are struggling, as they need policies that actually support their success rather than undermine their resources. Mr. Speaker, I yield the floor and the member's time has expired, moving us to the special order segment. Under the established rules, the representative from Virginia is recognized for 60 minutes to lead the designated session. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I request unanimous consent that all members have 5 days to revise their remarks and include relevant documents on this topic. Hearing no objection, I proceed with immense pride to host this special session on the first working day of a highly important cultural month. This year marks a century of public historical commemorations that began long ago when a brilliant historian partnered with a dedicated association to champion this cause. It originally started as a week-long event, eventually expanding to a full month to coincide with the birthdays of two monumental historical figures. This historian noted that people who do not know what their ancestors achieved will lose the inspiration that comes from understanding their own history. In other words, if you do not know where you come from or what your past looks like, you cannot fully understand who you are today or where you are going tomorrow. I grew up as a student of history, raised by parents who lived through intensely difficult eras of legal segregation in the South. I grew up listening to their stories about experiencing both the best of government programs during deep economic struggles and the worst of oppressive local laws. They shared family traditions about my ancestors, noting that we lacked documentation for some because the system did not deem them worthy of basic human records. However, we were fortunate to know the identity of one particular ancestor, even though we had very little formal information about his life. Everything we knew came from oral traditions, until my step-grandfather wrote a book that allowed me to deeply understand my family's incredible journey. That journey is an integral part of our national story, detailing how my relatives had to navigate incredibly biased systems just to exercise their basic civic rights. I learned how my family members had to pay unfair fees and pass ridiculous tests despite constitutional amendments guaranteeing their freedoms. I also learned how the women in my family were denied the right to vote until landmark civil rights legislation was finally passed in the modern era. The horror I felt watching tragic events unfold online recently matched the exact terror my parents felt during historical civil rights tragedies, because history often echoes itself. Through my family's story and national history, I have seen a clear pattern emerging from my home state, which was the birthplace of both domestic democracy and domestic tragedy. That region hosted the first Democratic Assembly, but shortly after, it became the site where captured individuals were traded for supplies, beginning a dark chapter. A century later, a leader from that same state wrote famous words about unalienable rights, though he did not apply those words to the people held in bondage on his own property. Yet the core idea of this country is something marginalized communities have constantly fought to make real for everyone, and every time we make progress, there is a severe backlash. That backlash always involves violence, false information, and attempts to restrict civic participation. My ancestors survived previous waves of backlash, and now my generation is facing another wave while dealing with leadership that wants to erase the uncomfortable parts of our past. However, those historical struggles motivate me, just as they did when I recently took my children to the National History Museum. Standing in the exhibits, I felt a profound sense of hope because I realized my ancestors survived absolute horrors so that I could stand in this chamber today. While I am fighting the same battles as my forebears, I do so from a position of strength and authority they could never have imagined. I fight these battles so my children and grandchildren will not have to, and I am proud to do this alongside my colleagues as we refuse to let our history be erased. We will celebrate our history every single day, and with that, I yield the floor to the esteemed representative from New York. Good evening. I am proud to represent my district, and I thank my colleague for hosting this vital session. Mr. Speaker, I stand today with my peers to honor this centennial commemoration and reflect on the massive contributions marginalized communities have made to our nation. We honor the bravery and sacrifice that have pushed this country forward, from its founding through massive cultural rebirths and civil rights movements. There is no point in our history where these individuals have failed to contribute to the strength of our society. As a leader in our coalition, I am proud that our group has grown significantly over the decades, constantly fighting to break barriers and protect community rights. We have repeatedly stepped up to defend the principles that keep our republic strong, especially when facing unprecedented threats. Today, under the current administration, we face relentless challenges aimed at our communities, from erasing historical facts in education to aggressive enforcement tactics. The hostility has been obvious, and vital voting protections remain at risk, placing our fundamental freedoms on the chopping block. These threats place us in a dangerous spot, but we are not powerless, and we will resist by standing on the shoulders of those who came before us. We will fight efforts to erase our history and block access to opportunities, knowing that attacks on inclusive policies are deeply targeted. Every month, we will make it clear that these historical contributions cannot be diminished or erased. We will keep fighting for fair representation and essential liberties because our history is undeniably the nation's history. I yield the floor back to the representative from Virginia, who then yields to the delegate from Georgia. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to the representative from Virginia, the very state where early colonists and enslaved persons first arrived centuries ago. I was honored to travel abroad recently to commemorate the deep historical impact of those early events, as understanding our history is incredibly vital. If a community does not tell its own story, it suffers a collective impairment, losing the knowledge of what its ancestors achieved. Knowing our history allows us to feel deep pride, regardless of the centuries of oppression and segregation our forebears faced. Many people today lack knowledge about these immense triumphs, which is exactly why this commemorative month was originally created. It was meant to highlight our past, which is full of effort, success, and resilience, not just subjugation. The brilliant historian who founded this initiative chose a specific time to honor the births of two monumental historical figures. We have made massive strides since those early days, which is why we feel so proud of achieving the highest political offices in the land. The journey has not been easy, just as it was not easy for early scholars who broke educational barriers to become legendary writers and reporters. Decades later, students advocated to expand this week into a full month, and a former president officially recognized it during the nation's bicentennial. We have observed it ever since, though we must stay vigilant against modern threats that mirror the hate groups of the past. Today we see disguised personnel using aggressive tactics in our streets, and we must remove them because the current leadership wants to turn back the clock. If you ignore history, you are doomed to repeat it, and we refuse to go backward. With those thoughts, I will take my seat and thank the leadership for organizing this vital session. Thank you, and I now yield the floor to the representative from Maryland. I want to thank my colleague for supporting this crucial discussion about why this historical remembrance must be a daily part of our lives. You cannot have a complete national history without including the massive contributions of marginalized communities. Looking at a group of people who survived centuries of systemic disadvantage shows an incredible resilience that the entire world should respect. Over a century ago, a famous leader warned that stripping humanity from others and crushing their spirits would eventually destroy the foundations of freedom for everyone. He argued that our true defense against tyranny is the universal love for liberty, and destroying that love plants the seeds of dictatorship. Disregarding the rights of others will eventually make a society comfortable with oppression, paving the way for a desperate ruler to take control. Those profound warnings have been ignored as a dangerous mindset has risen among us today. The current administration's attempts to deny fair justice and act as if we are blind to inequality is an insult to our collective intelligence. We urgently need people of all backgrounds to form alliances and stand up for what is morally correct. It is challenging to find enough people willing to do the right thing every day, so we must use this month to loudly champion our history, and I yield my time. Thank you, and I now yield the floor to the representative from South Carolina. I appreciate the time, and I am glad we are reflecting on those historical speeches, just as I recently reflected on how deeply our history is tied to the nation's history. Watching recent aggressive events unfold across the country reminded me heavily of tragic civil rights clashes from the past. Seeing a civilian lose their life while trying to protect someone else brought to mind historical figures who suffered the same fate at the hands of law enforcement. We must ask ourselves if we have learned any lessons from our past, or if we are comfortable watching society repeat its darkest moments. I cannot understand why certain leaders want to hide the magnificent contributions of diverse intellectuals and scientists who improved our nation. Why is it controversial to teach children about the brilliant minds who revolutionized medical storage and saved countless lives during global conflicts? Why is it perfectly acceptable to teach about famous inventors, but considered offensive to mention the diverse innovators who made those inventions actually work? We enjoy a far better society today because diverse minds work together to illuminate the world, and there is nothing wrong with celebrating that fact in our textbooks. Yet the current leadership seems terrified of this reality, even going so far as to remove historical military records of famous diverse athletes. This behavior shows a supreme level of immaturity, being so intimidated by your own history that you refuse to acknowledge the triumphs of others. That is exactly what this month is meant to combat, and I am old enough to remember when a former president finally expanded this celebration to a full month. There is nothing biased about thanking that leader for having the maturity to officially recognize these crucial historical contributions. As we approach the nation's major anniversary, we must offer proper respect to everyone who helped build this great country. I hope we continue gathering like this to honor our shared history, and I yield the floor. Thank you, and I now yield to the representative from Alabama. Mr. Speaker, I stand to recognize the phenomenal impact that diverse citizens have had on the very fabric of our society. This month is a chance to honor the visionaries and everyday people who built this nation and continue to shape its future. Representing a historic civil rights district, I stand on the shoulders of brave leaders who risked everything to demand equality and justice for all. Unfortunately, we are living in a time when these historical facts are under severe attack, as old battles have returned to the forefront. Over the past year, our communities have been targeted by policies that attempt to sanitize history, cut vital resources, and suppress the right to vote. The administration has canceled cultural celebrations, used terrible rhetoric against migrants, and watched as legal allies try to dismantle foundational voting rights laws. These actions threaten to drag us back to a time when inequality was the standard rule of the land. In my home state, we recently had to fight to prevent the administration from erasing military heroes from training guides and selling off vital historic monuments. These oppressive tactics are not new. They are borrowed from an old playbook designed to mute our voices and weaken our political power. In these troubling times, we must remember the final instructions of legendary civil rights leaders who told us to never give up the fight. We might be tired and angry, but we absolutely cannot surrender our voices or stop pointing out injustice wherever it hides. We must demand better from our elected officials and vote in unprecedented numbers to protect our future. Future generations are relying on us to meet this moment with the urgency it requires, because doing the right thing is always necessary. I yield the floor to the representative from Illinois. Mr. Speaker, I rise today to join my colleagues in honoring this vital month and recognizing the historic fraternities and sororities that have nurtured legendary leaders. These organizations have produced hundreds of trailblazers who have shaped our nation across every sector, from politics to athletics and civil rights. I want to take a moment to specifically acknowledge these 9 foundational groups that give us the tools to advocate for our communities. They have been present at every major historical turning point, fighting for equal rights and driving progress in science, arts, and culture. Today, we remain on the front lines battling an administration that wants to erase our past and treat us as secondary citizens. You cannot erase our past because it is woven entirely into the American story, and we will always stand strong against subjugation. I yield the floor to the representative from Nevada. Mr. Speaker, I take the floor to emphasize that American history is intrinsically linked to the history of marginalized communities. From historic marches to courtroom battles, every major expansion of democracy in this country was shaped by incredible bravery and sacrifice. We must ask why certain factions are trying to erase this truth, as ignoring the past does not fix today's massive inequalities. This commemorative month exists to correct centuries of omission, bringing these vital stories into our classrooms and national institutions. History is something we must confront so we do not repeat our worst mistakes while building a better tomorrow. That is why we stand as the moral conscience of the legislature, holding our government accountable to its highest promises, and I yield the floor. Thank you. And I yield to the representative from Ohio. Mr. Speaker, this month is incredibly crucial right now, as our ancestors' achievements are actively being denied and erased. We must look at how recent policies have actually harmed communities, dismantling progress and making life harder for everyday families. Instead of focusing on reckless political speeches, we must look at the disastrous financial policies and executive orders causing massive financial pain. Millions are losing access to health care, struggling with hunger due to aid cuts, and watching opportunities for homeownership vanish. Meanwhile, basic civic liberties are being openly trampled without any remorse under the false pretense that systemic bias no longer exists. As a minority woman, I can confidently say that claim is completely false because we have faced these exact same traps before. We historically fought back to create legal protections that favored the people over the powerful, and we will absolutely do it again. Despite the current chaos, we will overcome these hurdles because an attack on the rights of one group threatens everyone. We will hold our ground, make our voices heard, and emerge stronger than before, and I yield the floor to the representative from Illinois. Thank you for hosting this session, as I represent the very district where this historic month was originally conceptualized by a brilliant scholar. He realized that educational materials completely excluded diverse historical figures, pushing back against the racist idea that certain histories simply did not matter. He intentionally created this celebration to show people of different backgrounds working together to advance society. If we hide these facts, future generations will not know about the incredible alliances that fought for justice and humanity. Erasing diverse leaders from textbooks actively harms all students by providing an incomplete and weakened version of our national story. Today, we see terrible efforts to remove civil rights icons and legendary historical strategists from our public consciousness and currency. We must face our true history to keep this country strong, and I yield the floor to the representative from Oregon. Mr. Speaker, I stand here as a historic first for my state, deeply aware that I am only one generation removed from legal segregation. My mother was an incredibly bright student in a segregated system, and though society did not value her potential, she ensured I could write a different story. As part of this powerful coalition, I am reminded that I am not fighting alone, but alongside a fellowship dedicated to an inclusive future. I ask that we continue to rise together daily, and I yield the floor to the representative from Maryland. I will be brief as time is running out, but I recently traveled to Minnesota to investigate the tragic events and aggressive crowd control tactics occurring there. I was completely stunned by the severe force and ethnic targeting I witnessed, which sadly mirrors the dark days of our past civil rights struggles. We must ensure that security personnel understand they are public servants bound by the Constitution, not combatants operating above the law. It is also vital to remember that historical progress was achieved through massive coalitions of people from all backgrounds fighting together. We need to find a way to move forward in unity because we cannot achieve lasting justice alone. To quote a famous poet, you may try to bury us with twisted lies, but like dust, we will constantly rise above it, and I yield the floor. Under the established rules, the representative from California is recognized for 60 minutes. Mr. Speaker, I rise to address a massive public safety issue regarding illicit biological testing facilities discovered in my home state and neighboring regions. These unmonitored sites were found housing dangerous pathogens and genetically altered subjects without any federal oversight or tracking. A known fugitive managed these facilities under false pretenses, moving massive amounts of money while stockpiling incredibly lethal substances. Bipartisan legislation is desperately needed to create strict accountability, track dangerous materials, and close the massive security gaps allowing these sites to exist. We need a unified federal system to ensure that communities are not unknowingly sitting next to stockpiles of deadly biological hazards. I am also calling for a massive federal investigation into the wild financial fraud occurring within California's public assistance programs. Billions of taxpayer dollars intended for the vulnerable have been drained by criminals due to severe mismanagement at the state level. We need comprehensive data to develop an effective strategy to stop this theft and protect the hardworking taxpayers of our state. Finally, I want to honor an incredible local business leader retiring after 20 years of dedicated service to our regional economy, and I yield the floor.